The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Cora Anderson's blistered skin as she stumbled through the endless desert, her cracked lips parting in a silent plea for water that wouldn't come. It had been 3 days since her stagecoach was attacked by bandits, 3 days of wandering aimlessly through the unforgiving New Mexico territory, with nothing but the tattered remains of her once fine traveling dress and dwindling hope. Arizona Territory, 1878. The landscape stretched before Cora like a painter's cruel joke, beautiful in its vastness, yet deadly in its indifference. She had been traveling west from Boston to start a new life as a schoolteacher in Tucson when fate intervened with brutal efficiency. Her throat felt like sandpaper, each labored breath drawing in hot air that offered no relief. The silk parasol she'd brought from Boston, a frivolous thing her mother had insisted would protect her fair complexion, had been abandoned miles back, too heavy to carry as her strength faded. Now her once porcelain skin was an angry red, peeling in places where the sun had claimed its victory. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible even to her own ears. "Please, God, water." But God, if he was listening at all, seemed to have abandoned this forsaken place. The distant mountains shimmered like a mirage, taunting her with their unreachable promise of shade. Cora's steps faltered, her vision blurring as the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift and tilt. She didn't feel herself fall. One moment she was walking, the next she was face down in the scorching sand, the grit of it against her cheek, almost welcome compared to the burning sun above. Consciousness slipped away like water through cupped hands. Death, she thought with strange clarity, was coming for her in this desolate place, so far from the cool, tree-lined streets of Boston where she'd grown up. No one would know what happened to her. Her body would be claimed by the desert, bleached bones eventually buried by the shifting sands. Her father had warned her about the dangers of heading west alone, but she'd been determined to forge her own path. A shadow fell across her face. In her delirium, Cora thought it might be death's merciful shroud, until she heard the low, concerned voice. "Madam, can you hear me, madam?" With tremendous effort, she forced her swollen eyelids open. The figure above her was backlit by the blazing sun, making him appear more silhouette than man. All she could make out was the broad brim of a cowboy hat and wide shoulders blocking the harsh light. "Water," she managed to rasp, her tongue thick and unwieldy in her mouth. The stranger knelt beside her, and strong arms gently rolled her onto her back. A canteen pressed against her lips, and cool water sweeter than any champagne she'd ever tasted trickled into her mouth. She tried to gulp it down greedily, but the man pulled it away. "Easy now," he cautioned, his voice deep and steady. "Too much too fast will make you sick. Small sips." The water came again, and this time Cora forced herself to drink slowly, savoring each precious drop as it soothed her parched throat. As her vision cleared, she could finally see her savior properly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a cloudless sky. A few days' growth of beard shadowed his strong jaw, and beneath his dusty hat, she caught glimpses of dark hair. There was nothing refined about him. Everything from his worn leather vest to his scuffed boots spoke of a man who lived by the harsh rules of the frontier. "Thank you," she whispered when he finally took the canteen away. "Name's Kyle Reynolds," he said, studying her with concern. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone, madam?" "Cora Anderson," she replied, her voice still rough. "Our stagecoach was attacked. Bandits. They took everything. I ran, got lost." Kyle's expression darkened. "The Prescott stage, we heard it hadn't made it to Tucson." He glanced around, scanning the horizon. "Anyone else make it out?" Cora closed her eyes, remembering the shots, the screams. "I don't know. I just ran when the shooting started. I've been walking for days trying to find help." "You're lucky I found you," he said, his tone gentler now. "Another few hours in this heat." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "Can you stand?" he asked after a moment. I'm not sure," Kyle nodded, seemingly coming to a decision. "That's all right. My horse isn't far." Without further discussion, he slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her shoulders, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. Under different circumstances, Cora would have protested such familiarity from a stranger. But as her head rested against his solid chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his cotton shirt, propriety seemed a distant concern compared to survival. "I have a camp set up about a mile from here," he explained as he carried her. "Near a river. Once you're properly hydrated and cooled down, we can figure out what to do next." A river. The word itself felt like salvation. Cora wanted to thank him again, to ask questions about where they were and how far from civilization, but exhaustion claimed her. The gentle rocking motion as Kyle walked, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone in the vast desert, lulled her back into unconsciousness, but this time, without the fear of never waking again. When Cora next opened her eyes, the merciless sun had been replaced by the soft orange glow of a campfire. She was lying on a bedroll beneath a canvas tarp strung between two scrubby trees, providing blessed shade. A damp cloth rested on her forehead, and someone had draped a light blanket over her despite the lingering heat of the day. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back: the stagecoach attack, days of wandering, and the cowboy who'd found her. Kyle. She turned her head, searching for him, and found him crouched by the fire, stirring something in a battered tin pot. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his expression brightening when he saw she was awake. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Miss Anderson," he said, setting aside his wooden spoon and moving to her side. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she answered truthfully, though her body ached as if she'd been trampled by horses. "And please call me Cora," he nodded, reaching for a canteen. "You need to keep drinking. Doctor's orders." "Are you a doctor?" she asked, accepting the water gratefully. A small smile crossed his face, transforming his rugged features. "No, madam, just a cowboy who's seen his share of heat sickness, but I reckon my advice is sound all the same." "I'm in your debt, Mr. Reynolds." "Kyle," he corrected. "And there's no debt between folks out here. The desert doesn't play favorites. We all need help sometimes." Cora took another sip of water, her eyes never leaving his face. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet confidence that made her feel safer than she had since leaving Boston. "I've made some stew," he said, nodding toward the pot. "Nothing fancy, just beans and jerky with a few wild onions, but it'll put strength back in you." "It sounds wonderful," she replied honestly. "I haven't eaten in days." Kyle helped her sit up, adjusting the saddle he'd placed behind her as a backrest. The simple act of moving left her dizzy, but the smell of the cooking food awakened a hunger so intense it was almost painful. "Where are we?" she asked as he fetched her a tin plate of stew. "About 40 miles northeast of Tucson," he answered, handing her the food. "We're camped along the San Pedro River. It's not much this time of year, but it's water." Cora ate slowly, savoring each bite of the simple fare. "Is there a town nearby?" Kyle settled back on his heels, watching her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Next real town's Benson, about a day's ride from here. I was planning to head there anyway, once I finished my business in these parts." "Your business?" He gestured vaguely toward the open country. "I'm a scout of sorts. The cattle company I work for is looking to expand their grazing lands. I've been mapping water sources and assessing the terrain." He paused, Was Tucson your final destination? Cora nodded. I accepted a position as a schoolteacher there. The school board arranged my passage. Long way from home, Kyle observed. Your accent isn't local, Boston, she confirmed. I needed a fresh start. Something in her tone must have conveyed more than her words, for Kyle didn't press further. Instead, he took her empty plate and refilled it. The school board will think I've abandoned my post, she said suddenly, the realization hitting her. If they've heard about the stagecoach attack, they'll assume I'm dead. We'll send word once we reach Benson, Kyle assured her. The telegraph line was completed last year. You can wire them yourself. The simple solution eased one worry, though countless others remained. All her possessions were gone, taken by the bandits or abandoned in the desert. The money her father had given her for emergencies, sewn into a hidden pocket in her petticoat, had been depleted during her journey. She had nothing, not even a change of clothes. As if reading her thoughts, Kyle spoke again. I have a spare shirt you can use. It'll be too big, but it's clean. And once we reach town, we can see about proper attire. I couldn't impose further, it's no imposition, he interrupted gently. I wasn't planning to wear 2 shirts at once anyhow. The joke, mild as it was, surprised a laugh from her. The sound seemed to please him, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. For the first time, Cora took stock of her surroundings properly. Kyle's camp was simple but efficient. The canvas shelter, a small fire with coffee pot and cooking implements, his saddle and gear neatly arranged, and a beautiful chestnut horse tethered nearby, contentedly grazing on the sparse vegetation. Your horse is magnificent, she commented. That's Rusty, Kyle said, a note of pride in his voice. Best cow pony in the territory, though don't tell the other hands I said so. Their mounts might get jealous. How long have you been a cowboy? She asked, curious about this man who'd saved her life. Kyle settled back, stretching his long legs out before him. Since I was 16. Started as a wrangler for the Bar X spread up in Colorado territory, worked my way up to trail boss by 25. He took a sip from his tin cup. Been with the Sonora Land and Cattle Company for 3 years now. They're good folks, treat a man fair. And your family, a shadow crossed his face, lost my pa to the war he fought for the Union. Ma passed a few years back. Got a younger brother somewhere in California chasing gold dreams. He shrugged. The men I work with are the closest thing to family these days. Cora nodded, understanding. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me alone. He wasn't pleased about my decision to come west. Parents rarely are when their children choose dangerous paths, Kyle observed. Can't say I blame him, especially considering what happened. He wanted me to marry a business associate of his, Cora found herself confessing. A man 30 years my senior with 3 grown children, said it would secure my future. She looked down at her hands. I couldn't do it. Kyle was silent for a long moment. So you ran. It wasn't a question, but Cora nodded anyway. I've always wanted to teach. When I saw the advertisement for a schoolteacher in Arizona territory, it seemed like providence. And now I'm determined more than ever, she said firmly. If the position is still available. Kyle smiled again, that warm expression that transformed his weather-beaten face. I admire your spirit, Cora Anderson. Not many women or men, for that matter, would survive what you've endured and still keep their purpose. The genuine admiration in his voice brought warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with sunburn. For the first time since the stagecoach attack, Cora felt a flutter of something beyond mere survival, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling. We should rest, Kyle said, breaking the moment. Tomorrow we'll follow the river north toward Benson. It's easier going and you'll need to build your strength back. I've imposed on you enough, Cora protested. Surely you have your work to complete. Kyle shook his head. My report can wait. Right now, getting you to safety is more important. He gestured to the bedroll she occupied. You keep that. I've slept on harder ground than this. Before she could object further, he moved away to tend to his horse, checking Rusty's hooves and speaking softly to the animal in tones too low for her to hear. Cora watched him, this stranger who'd appeared like a mirage in the desert and turned out to be real solid, dependable, kind. As the fire burned low and the stars emerged in breathtaking clarity above the desert, Cora realized how close she'd come to death. The thought was sobering, yet strangely freeing. She'd faced the worst the frontier could offer and survived. Whatever challenges lay ahead couldn't possibly be more daunting than what she'd already endured. With that comforting thought, she drifted into the deepest sleep she'd known in days, lulled by the gentle sound of the river and the quiet movements of the cowboy who'd saved her life. Morning came with the gentle chirping of birds and the soft gurgling of the river. Cora awoke feeling remarkably renewed, though still weak. She found Kyle already up, tending a small fire where coffee brewed in a battered pot. "Good morning," he greeted, looking up from his task. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in days," she admitted, pushing herself to a sitting position. "Thank you," he nodded, pouring a cup of the strong black coffee and passing it to her. "Drink this. It's not fancy Eastern coffee, but it'll put hair on your chest." He caught himself, looking slightly embarrassed. "Forgive me. That's not a proper thing to say to a lady." The comment startled a laugh from Cora. "Mr. Reynolds, Kyle, I think we're well past the point of standing on ceremony. You've seen me at my worst and most desperate. A little straight talk won't offend me." Relief flickered across his features. "Good, because I'm not much for fancy words or city manners." "I find honesty preferable to polish," she said, sipping the coffee. It was indeed strong enough to make her eyes water, but the warmth and stimulation were welcome. While she drank, Kyle busied himself with breakfast hardtack softened in the coffee and a few strips of jerky. As promised, he also produced a clean shirt for her, worn but whole. "There's a bend in the river just downstream," he said, handing her the garment. "Offers some privacy if you'd like to wash up. I'll keep my back turned." Cora accepted gratefully. "I must look a fright." "You look like someone who survived when others might not have," Kyle said seriously. "There's nothing frightful about that." His words stayed with her as she made her way to the secluded spot he'd indicated. The river was shallow but clear, and the cool water felt heavenly against her sun-damaged skin. She washed as best she could without soap, scrubbing away days of dust and fear. When she returned to camp wearing Kyle's shirt over her tattered dress, he had packed most of their belongings and saddled Rusty. "I thought we might ride double," he explained. "You're in no condition to walk far, and Rusty can handle both of us for a day's journey." Cora hesitated. Riding with a man, pressed against him for hours, it was scandalously improper. Yet so was being alone with him in the wilderness, and propriety seemed a luxury compared to necessity. "I'm afraid I've never ridden astride," she admitted. "Only side saddle, and rarely at that." Kyle's expression remained neutral. "It's not difficult. I'll help you up and you just need to hold on. Rusty's gentle as they come." He cupped his hands to give her a boost, and soon she was settled in the saddle, her skirts arranged as modestly as possible. Kyle swung up behind her with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. "All right?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Cora nodded, acutely aware of his solid presence at her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. It was at once terrifying and comforting, this forced intimacy with a man she'd known less than a day. They set off at an easy pace, following the winding course of the San Pedro River. Kyle explained they'd make better time staying near water rather than cutting across the open desert, and there was less chance of running into trouble. "What sort of trouble?" Cora asked, thinking of the bandits who'd attacked the stagecoach. "Apache," Kyle answered simply. "There's been peace lately, but tensions run high. Some bands still resist reservation life, and I can't say I blame them, but it makes traveling certain areas risky." "You seem to understand them," Cora observed. Kyle was quiet for a moment. "I try to. Spent some time with a Ute guide up in Colorado, learned their ways of tracking, reading the land. They were here first, after all. This was their home before it was ours." His perspective surprised her. In Boston, talk of Indians was almost always accompanied by words like savage and uncivilized. Yet here was this cowboy, speaking of them with respect. "Most people I've met don't share that view," she said carefully. "Most people haven't lived out here long enough to understand," he replied. "There's good and bad among all peoples. I judge a man or woman by their actions, not where they came from or what they look like." They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the gentle sounds of the desert creating a peaceful backdrop. Despite her initial discomfort at their proximity, Cora found herself relaxing against Kyle's chest, lulled by the motion and the warmth of his presence. Around midday, they stopped to rest in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. Kyle helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Her legs trembled slightly from the unaccustomed exercise. "We're making good time," he said, leading Rusty to the river to drink. "Should reach Benson by nightfall if we keep this pace." Cora stretched, working the stiffness from her muscles. "I'm surprised at how quickly the landscape changes." "Even in this heat, there's life along the river." Kyle nodded, gesturing to the verdant strip of vegetation that followed the waterway. "That's why they call these areas ribbons of life. Everything in the desert depends on water. Plants, animals, people, we all follow the same paths to survive." He handed her the canteen and some jerky, then stood gazing northward, his expression thoughtful. "What will you do after you deliver me to Benson?" Cora asked, suddenly realizing she'd grown accustomed to his presence. Kyle turned back to her. "Finish my scouting work, I suppose." "Report back to the company." He paused. "What about you? Will you continue to Tucson, if they'll still have me as their teacher?" she said. "I've come too far to turn back now." "Stubborn," he remarked with a slight smile. "That's a good quality out here." "My father called it willfulness," she admitted. "Not a desirable trait in a Boston lady." Kyle's smile widened. "Well, you're not in Boston anymore, are you?" The simple observation struck Cora profoundly. No, she wasn't in Boston anymore, with its rigid social structures and expectations. Here in this vast, unforgiving land, different rules applied. Survival, honesty, capability, these mattered more than social graces or proper connections. "No," she agreed, "I'm not, and I'm beginning to think that's for the best." They resumed their journey after the brief rest, Cora now more comfortable with their shared saddle. As they rode, Kyle pointed out features of the landscape, naming plants and explaining their uses, identifying animal tracks, teaching her to read the desert as one might read a book. "There," he said, gesturing to a distant smudge on the northern horizon. "That's smoke from Benson. We should be there by sundown." The prospect of returning to civilization brought mixed feelings. Relief, certainly she'd have proper food, clean clothes, a real bed. But also a strange reluctance to end this journey with the quiet cowboy whose presence had become a source of comfort. "Kyle," she said hesitantly, "I don't know how to thank you properly. You saved my life." His arms tightened slightly around her. "No thanks needed." "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she disagreed. "Not anyone. Many would have ridden past or worse. He was silent for a long moment. My mother taught me that a man's character is revealed in how he treats those who need help. I'm just glad I found you when I did. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Cora. In Boston, she'd been courted by men with flowery words and grand gestures, none of which had moved her as much as this simple statement of values from a man who lived by them. As predicted, they reached the outskirts of Benson just as the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The town was small by Eastern standards, but represented civilization after the wilderness wooden buildings lining a main street, the gleam of windows, the sounds of humanity. Kyle guided Rusty directly to a modest two-story building, with a sign identifying it as the Cattleman's Hotel and Restaurant. A balding man in a stained apron stood on the porch, eyeing them curiously as they approached. "Evening, Morris," Kyle called. "Got a room available for the lady." The man, Morris, apparently raised his eyebrows at the sight of Cora in her disheveled state. "Reynolds, that you? Been wondering when you'd show up." His gaze shifted to Cora. "And who might this be?" "Miss Cora Anderson," Kyle answered, dismounting before helping Cora down. "Survivor of the Prescott stage robbery, found her out near Eagle Pass suffering from heat exposure." Morris's expression immediately softened. "Lord have mercy, miss. We heard about that attack. 3 days ago, wasn't it? They found the stage and the bodies, but a couple passengers were unaccounted for." Cora swayed slightly, the implications hitting her hard. Bodies. She'd known, of course, that people had likely died, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way her memory of fleeing hadn't. Kyle's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "She needs a room, a hot meal, and some decent rest. And if there's a dress shop in town, she'll need some new clothes. Bandits took everything." Of course," Morris nodded vigorously. "My wife can help with clothing till the shop's open tomorrow. Room's on the house, least we can do for a survivor." "I can pay," Kyle began, but Morris waved him off. "Nonsense. We take care of our own out here. You too, Reynolds. Your usual room's free." Cora found herself ushered into the hotel's small but clean dining room, where Morris's wife, a plump, motherly woman named Harriet, fussed over her condition, bringing hot water for washing and promising to find suitable clothing. Kyle excused himself to see to Rusty, promising to return shortly. In his absence, Cora felt strangely vulnerable despite the kindness of the innkeepers. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, the quiet strength he emanated. Harriet brought a simple but hearty meal of beef stew, freshly baked bread, and apple pie, encouraging Cora to eat her fill. "You're just skin and bones, dear," she clucked. "Need to put some meat on those bones." When Kyle returned, freshly washed and in a clean shirt, Cora felt an unexpected rush of pleasure at seeing him. He took a seat across from her, accepting the plate Harriet placed before him with thanks. "I've arranged for you to send a telegram in the morning," he told Cora. "The operator opens at 8. You can let the school board in Tucson know you're alive and will arrive soon." "Thank you," she said, genuinely moved by his thoughtfulness. "For everything." Kyle nodded, focusing on his food with unusual intensity. Something in his demeanor had changed, a new reserve that hadn't been present during their journey. "Will you continue your scouting work tomorrow?" she asked. He glanced up. "No, I'll escort you to Tucson." "It's only right to see this through." "You've done more than enough," Cora protested. "I couldn't ask you to delay your work further. You didn't ask, I offered." His tone brooked no argument. "Besides, the stage from here to Tucson only runs twice weekly. Next one's not till Thursday." "That's 3 days from now," Kyle nodded. "So unless you want to wait, we'll ride. Rusty can handle it. We'll take it easy, maybe 2 days' journey with a night's camp in between." The prospect of more time in Kyle's company should not have pleased her as much as it did. Propriety demanded she find another solution. But the memory of her desperate days alone in the desert was still too fresh, the fear too real. "If you're certain it's no trouble," she conceded. Something like relief flickered across his features. "No trouble." After their meal, Harriet showed Cora to a simple but clean room on the second floor. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a small chest of drawers. To Cora, after days in the wilderness, it seemed luxurious. "I've left a nightgown on the bed," Harriet told her. "It's one of mine, so it'll be big, but it's clean. And I'll have some day clothes for you in the morning. Nothing fancy, mind you, but decent enough until you can visit the mercantile." "You're very kind," Cora said, fighting sudden tears. After so much hardship, such simple kindness was overwhelming. Harriet patted her arm. "Get some rest, dear. You're safe now." But as Cora prepared for bed, washing away the last traces of her ordeal and changing into the voluminous nightgown, she found herself thinking not of safety, but of the man who had brought her to it. Kyle Reynolds, with his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of duty, his sky-blue eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. It was foolish to entertain such thoughts. He was a cowboy, a scout, a man of the frontier. She was an educated woman from Boston, soon to be a schoolteacher in Tucson. Their paths had crossed by chance, by her misfortune and his kindness. Once he delivered her to Tucson, they would part ways, likely never to meet again. Yet as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the muted sounds of the small town, Cora couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to remain in Kyle's company, to learn more about this man who had saved her not just with water and shelter, but with quiet respect and unfailing decency. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed not of the terrifying desert, but of riding along the river with strong arms around her, and the scent of leather and sage surrounding her. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the thin curtains, and the sounds of a town coming to life. Cora rose feeling refreshed despite her troubled sleep, eager to begin putting her life back in order. Harriet had been true to her word. A simple but serviceable blue calico dress was laid out, along with undergarments, stockings, and practical boots. They weren't fine Boston fashions, but they were clean and appropriate, and Cora was grateful beyond words. After dressing and arranging her hair as best she could with a borrowed hairbrush, she made her way downstairs to find Kyle already at breakfast, deep in conversation with a man in a sheriff's badge. Both men stood when they saw her, and Kyle made introductions. "Cora, this is Sheriff Tanner. He's been tracking the band that hit your stage." The sheriff, a weathered man in his 50s, nodded respectfully. "Miss Anderson, glad to see you alive. Was hoping you might be able to tell me anything you remember about the attack." Over breakfast, Cora recounted what she could recall of that terrible day, the sudden appearance of masked riders, the shots fired, her desperate flight into the desert. Much of it remained a blur of fear and confusion, but the sheriff listened attentively, occasionally making notes. "Sounds like the Mosley gang," he said when she finished. "They've been hitting stages between here and Prescott for months. Army's been after them, but they know the country too well." He tucked away his notebook. "I appreciate your help, miss. Every detail counts." After the sheriff departed, Kyle accompanied Cora to the telegraph office, where she sent messages to both the Tucson School Board and her father in Boston, assuring them of her survival. The operator estimated it would take several days for a reply from Boston, but the Tucson response might come before she departed. "What now?" she asked Kyle as they stepped back onto the dusty street. "Supplies," he answered. We'll need provisions for the journey to Tucson. He hesitated. And you might want to visit the mercantile for any personal items you need. Cora nodded, suddenly aware of how dependent she was on this man's charity. I have no money, she admitted quietly. The bandits took what little I had with me, and my bank draft was in my trunk on the stage. Kyle met her eyes steadily. Consider it an advance on your teaching salary. You can repay me when you're settled if it matters to you. It did matter. Cora had left Boston partly to escape depending on a man for her livelihood. Yet here she was, accepting Kyle's help because she had no choice. I will repay every cent, she promised. A faint smile touched his lips. I have no doubt. The mercantile provided the essentials: a comb and hairpins, a shawl for cool evenings, a change of undergarments, and a small bottle of rose water that felt like an extravagant luxury after days without. Kyle, meanwhile, purchased food supplies, ammunition, and a new canteen. As they exited the store, a telegram messenger hurried toward them, waving a yellow paper. Miss Anderson, he called. Urgent reply from Tucson. Cora accepted the telegram with trembling hands, reading it quickly. Her expression must have reflected her dismay, for Kyle stepped closer. Bad news. The school board is delighted at my survival, she said, her voice tight. But they've already hired a replacement, believing me dead. They express their regrets and wish me well in my future endeavors. The cruel irony of surviving the desert only to find her purpose snatched away left her momentarily speechless. All the planning, the journey, the suffering for nothing. Kyle's hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder. I'm sorry, Cora. She straightened her spine, folding the telegram carefully. It changes nothing. I'll continue to Tucson and find another position. I refuse to return to Boston defeated. Admiration flickered in his eyes. I believe you will succeed, but perhaps there's another option to consider. What option? Kyle gestured toward the hotel. Let's discuss it over lunch. You need to keep your strength up regardless of what you decide. Over a meal of chicken and dumplings, Kyle explained that Benson's small school had lost its teacher 3 weeks prior, when Mrs. Abernathy's husband struck silver and whisked her off to San Francisco. The town council's been searching for a replacement, he said. Terms meant to start in 2 weeks. 26 students, ages 6 to 16. Cora stared at him. How do you know this? Sheriff mentioned it this morning while you were dressing. Thought it might be relevant to your situation. The possibility was tempting. Benson was smaller than Tucson, more rugged, but it was a real town with real needs, and she'd be able to begin immediately rather than searching for a position that might not exist. I don't know anyone here, she said hesitantly. You know Morris and Harriet, Kyle countered, and the sheriff, and me. That last addition hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken significance. Would you be staying in Benson? She asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider, a flicker of something hope. Uncertainty crossed his face. My work takes me throughout the territory, but Benson's where the company has its headquarters. I'm here at least once a month to report. I see. Cora studied her plate, processing this information. And the Sonora Land and Cattle Company, they're a significant presence here. Kyle nodded. Largest employer in the area outside the railroad. Owner's a fair man, invested in the town's growth. He'd likely be pleased to have a proper teacher for the local children, including his own. The picture Kyle painted was appealing: a community where she might make a meaningful difference, not unlike what she'd hoped for in Tucson, but with the added benefit of familiar faces. I'd like to meet with the town council, she decided. At least hear what they have to offer before continuing to Tucson. Relief visibly washed over Kyle's features. I'll arrange it for this afternoon. True to his word, by 3 o'clock that day, Cora found herself in the town's small meeting hall, facing 5 members of the Benson Town Council, 3 men and 2 women, all regarding her with undisguised interest. "Miss Anderson comes highly recommended," Kyle said, standing beside her. She was en route to take a teaching position in Tucson when her stagecoach was attacked. "She survived 3 days alone in the desert before I found her." "Impressive fortitude," remarked an older gentleman with mutton-chop whiskers. "But does she have teaching experience?" "4 years as an assistant teacher at the Brighton Academy for Young Ladies in Boston," Cora answered for herself. "I'm certified to teach all common subjects through advanced levels, plus music and French." The council members exchanged impressed glances. "That's more qualification than we dared hope for," said one of the women. Mrs. Abernathy was a rancher's wife who could read and cipher well enough to teach the basics. "The position pays $40 monthly, plus room and board at the schoolhouse," the council chairman explained. "Term runs September through June, with breaks for Christmas and planting season." "The schoolhouse has living quarters?" Cora asked, surprised. "Small but adequate," the other woman confirmed. 2 rooms attached to the rear of the school building. There's a pump for water and an outhouse nearby. Simple accommodations, but private, independence. Her own place, her own income, her own purpose. It was everything Cora had hoped for when leaving Boston. "When could you begin?" asked the chairman. "Immediately," Cora replied. "Though I would need a few days to prepare lessons and become familiar with the student's previous education." The council conferred briefly before the chairman extended his hand. "Welcome to Benson, Miss Anderson. The position is yours if you want it." The decision felt right in a way few in her life had. "I accept with gratitude," she said, shaking his hand firmly. Outside the meeting hall, Kyle waited, his expression carefully neutral. "Well, I'm to be Benson's new schoolteacher," she told him, unable to suppress a smile. "Classes begin Monday week." Something like joy transformed his features. "Congratulations, they're fortunate to have you." "I'm fortunate as well," she admitted. "If not for you, I'd have perished in the desert. Instead, I have a position, a home, a future." Kyle looked away, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You've earned it. Your courage, your determination, those are qualities that will serve you well here." They walked back toward the hotel in companionable silence, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Benson unfolded before Cora with new eyes, not just a stopping point on her journey, but her new home. "The council mentioned you'll have the weekend to settle in," Kyle said as they reached the hotel. "I was thinking, that is, if you'd like. I could show you some of the area before I have to report back to the main ranch on Monday." The invitation, delivered with uncharacteristic hesitation, touched Cora deeply. "I'd like that very much," she replied. His smile was reward enough for her acceptance. "Good. We'll start tomorrow, then. There's a spot up by the river fork that's worth seeing." That evening at dinner, news of Cora's appointment had already spread through the small town. Several patrons approached their table to introduce themselves, including the blacksmith, whose twin daughters would be in her class, and the elderly widow who served as the town's unofficial librarian. "Community seems pleased with the council's choice," Kyle observed after the latest well-wisher had departed. "They're kind," Cora said. "I hope I can live up to their expectations." "You survived the desert with nothing but your wits," he reminded her. "Teaching arithmetic to ranch children should be manageable by comparison." His quiet confidence in her abilities warmed Cora more than the hearty meal before them. There was something uniquely comforting about being truly seen by another person, especially one whose opinion had come to matter so deeply in such a short time. As promised, the next morning Kyle arrived at the hotel mounted on Rusty, leading a gentle-looking bay mare. "Borrowed her from the company stable," he explained. "Thought you might prefer your own mount today rather than riding double." The thoughtfulness of the gesture wasn't lost on Cora, who had dressed in her new calico dress and the practical boots Harriet had provided. Kyle helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. They rode north out of town, following the river's course. The late August heat was still intense, but nothing like the deadly furnace Cora had experienced during her ordeal. With adequate water, proper clothing, and Kyle's steady presence beside her, the desert revealed its harsh beauty rather than its dangers. "There," Kyle said after about an hour's ride, pointing to where the river split into two channels around a small, tree-covered island. "That's where we're headed." The spot, when they reached it, took Cora's breath away. The island was a lush oasis of cottonwood trees and flowering bushes, alive with birdsong and the gentle music of flowing water. Kyle helped her dismount, then tied the horses in the shade where they could drink from the clear stream. "It's beautiful," Cora breathed, turning slowly to take in the unexpected paradise. "Thought you might appreciate seeing a different side of the desert," Kyle said, watching her face. "It's not all scorched earth and cactus." They spread a blanket beneath the largest cottonwood, and Kyle produced a simple picnic of bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of cider. As they ate, he pointed out various birds and plants, sharing knowledge that spoke of years observing the land with careful attention. "How did you become so versed in nature?" Cora asked, genuinely curious. Kyle leaned back against the tree trunk. "Necessity at first. Out here, not knowing the difference between a harmless snake and a deadly one can kill you. Not recognizing which plants are poisonous and which are medicinal can mean the same." He plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "But after a while, it became more than survival. There's a satisfaction in understanding how everything fits together, how it all serves a purpose." "You speak like a philosopher," she observed. He laughed softly. "Hardly. Just a man who spent more time under the stars than under a roof. Do you ever wish for a more settled life?" The question escaped before Cora could consider its implications. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves above them. "There was a time I didn't," he finally answered. "The open country, the freedom of moving with the seasons, it suited me." His eyes shifted to meet hers. "Lately, though, I've been thinking there might be something to putting down roots." The intensity of his gaze sent a flutter of awareness through Cora that had nothing to do with the pleasant cider or the warm afternoon. There was meaning in his words beyond their surface, an invitation she wasn't entirely sure how to answer. "What changed your mind?" she asked, her voice softer than intended. Kyle's expression gentled. "Maybe it's not about what changed, but who." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Cora found herself unable to look away from his face, from the quiet hope she saw there. "Kyle," she began, uncertain what she meant to say. He shook his head slightly. "You don't need to answer. I know we've known each other less than a week. I know your life's been turned upside down and you're just finding your footing." He hesitated. "I just wanted you to know that meeting you has made me reconsider some things I thought were settled." The honesty of his confession touched Cora deeply. Here was a man who spoke his truth without artifice or manipulation, who offered his feelings without demand or expectation. How different from the calculated courtships she'd experienced in Boston, where every interaction was laden with social implications and family expectations. "I'm glad you found me in the desert," she said simply. Kyle's smile was slow and warm, transforming his weathered features. "So am I." They spent the afternoon exploring the small island, Kyle showing her edible berries and teaching her to recognize animal tracks in the soft earth by the riverbank. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they reluctantly packed up their picnic and prepared to return to town. "There's something I want to show you first," Kyle said, helping her mount the bay mare. "It's on the way back, just a slight detour." He led them along a different path, climbing a gentle ridge that overlooked the river valley. At the crest, he signaled for them to stop. "Look," he said, gesturing toward the expansive view. Benson lay in the distance, its buildings small but distinct in the clear air. Beyond it stretched the vast landscape of the Arizona Territory, rugged mountains, rolling hills, the sinuous path of the river cutting through it all. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, turning the desert into a sea of amber and bronze. "This is my favorite view," Kyle said quietly. "You can see for miles. Makes a man feel both small and significant at the same time." Cora understood what he meant. The vastness was humbling, yet there was something empowering about being able to comprehend it, to find one's place within it. "Thank you for sharing it with me," she said. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared perspective, of mutual understanding that transcended their different backgrounds and experiences. The ride back to town was companionable, filled with comfortable silence and occasional observations about the landscape. As they reached the outskirts of Benson, reality began to intrude on the day's idyll. Tomorrow, Cora would move into the schoolhouse quarters and begin preparing for her new role. Kyle would return to the main ranch to report his findings from his scouting expedition. At the hotel, Kyle helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. "I'll see you tomorrow before I leave," he promised. "Help you move your things to the schoolhouse." "I'd like that," Cora replied, surprised by how much she meant it. That night, as she prepared for bed, Cora found herself reflecting on the swift changes in her life. A week ago, she'd been on the stagecoach, full of anticipation for her new position in Tucson. Then had come the attack, the desperate days in the desert, and the moment when a cowboy with kind eyes had appeared like salvation personified. Now she was to be Benson's schoolteacher, with a home and purpose of her own. And Kyle Reynolds, the man who had saved her life, had become someone whose presence she'd come to value beyond gratitude, whose company she sought for reasons that had nothing to do with obligation. It was too soon to name the feeling stirring within her. Too soon after her ordeal, too soon after meeting him. Yet Cora couldn't deny the flutter in her chest when he smiled, the comfort she found in his presence, the way his words and thoughts seemed to align with her own in unexpected ways. Morning brought a flurry of activity. The council chairman arrived with keys to the schoolhouse and a list of students. Harriet helped Cora pack the few belongings she'd acquired and presented her with a parting gift, a handmade quilt for her new home. "It gets cold at night, even in summer," the older woman explained. "And this will brighten up those plain quarters." Kyle appeared as promised, driving a wagon borrowed from the livery. He loaded Cora's modest possessions, then helped her up onto the seat beside him. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room structure with a bell tower and a covered porch. Behind it, as promised, was a small addition, her new living quarters. "Let me show you around before I start unloading," Kyle said, helping her down from the wagon. The schoolroom itself was basic but serviceable, rows of wooden desks facing a larger teacher's desk on a raised platform. A blackboard covering most of one wall, bookshelves containing a limited selection of texts and primers. Windows lined both sides, providing good light and ventilation. The living quarters were similarly simple: a main room with a cast iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a small sofa, and a bedroom just large enough for a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. What the rooms lacked in size or luxury, they made up for in cleanliness and privacy. "It's perfect," Cora declared, genuinely pleased. After the desert and the uncertainty, having a place of her own felt like an extraordinary blessing. Kyle seemed relieved by her reaction. "The pump's just outside the back door. Outhouse is behind that stand of trees for privacy. And there's a small garden plot if you've a mind for growing things." They spent the next hour arranging her few belongings, Kyle mounting shelves and fixing a loose window shutter while Cora organized her living space. The domestic scene struck Cora as both strange and natural, this rough-hewn cowboy hammering nails in what was now her home, the two of them working together as if they'd done so for years, rather than hours. When everything was settled, they stood somewhat awkwardly in the main room, both aware that the time for parting had come. "Thank you for everything," Cora said, meaning far more than the day's help. Kyle nodded, his hat in his hands. "I'll be back in town in about 3 weeks. Company business." The information was delivered casually, but Cora recognized it for what it was: a promise to return, a request to see her again. "I'd be glad to hear how your scouting report was received," she said, offering the excuse he seemed to need. Relief flickered across his features. "Good, that's good." He replaced his hat, seemingly ready to depart, then hesitated. "Cora," whatever he meant to say remained unspoken as someone knocked at the front door of the schoolhouse. Kyle's expression shifted to one of frustration before smoothing into polite neutrality. The visitor proved to be Reverend Phillips, the local minister and head of the school board, come to welcome Cora officially and discuss the curriculum. By the time their conversation concluded, Kyle had returned the wagon and was preparing to depart. Cora found him at the livery, saddling Rusty for the journey back to the ranch. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," she explained, slightly breathless from her hurried walk. Kyle's expression softened. "I'm glad you did." He secured the last strap on his saddle, then turned to face her fully. "Cora, I know it's too soon to speak of certain things. You're just settling in, finding your way, but I want you to know that when I return, I hope to call on you, properly if you'd allow it." The formal request, delivered with such earnest hope, touched Cora deeply. "I would welcome that," she answered honestly. His smile was worth any impropriety in her eager response. "Then I'll count the days." Impulsively, Cora stepped forward and pressed a kiss to his cheek, the brief contact sending a current of awareness through her. "For luck on your journey," she said, stepping back. Kyle's eyes had darkened, his expression intense. "With luck like that, I'll make it back in 2 weeks instead of 3. They parted with that promise hanging between them, not quite spoken but understood nonetheless. As Cora watched him ride away, Rusty's chestnut coat gleaming in the morning sun, she felt not loss but anticipation. Their story, improbable as it had begun, was far from over. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as Cora prepared for the school term. She organized lessons, reviewed the available textbooks, visited the families of her future students, and gradually transformed the Spartan schoolhouse into a welcoming place of learning. The people of Benson proved friendly and supportive, if somewhat reserved at first with the Eastern newcomer. But Cora's genuine interest in their community and her evident dedication to teaching soon won over even the most skeptical parents. Through it all, her thoughts often turned to Kyle. She wondered where he was, what he was doing, whether he thought of her as frequently as she thought of him. It seemed impossible that a man she'd known so briefly could occupy so much of her mind. Yet there it was an awareness that had begun with gratitude and grown into something deeper, more complex. Exactly 17 days after their parting, not that she was counting, Cora was writing lesson plans at her table when a knock sounded at her door. Her heart leapt, though she told herself it could be any number of people, a parent with questions, Reverend Phillips with curriculum suggestions, the widow Simmons with another basket of preserves. But when she opened the door, it was Kyle who stood there, hat in hand, freshly shaven and wearing what appeared to be a new shirt. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "As promised," he replied, his smile warming his eyes, "though not as soon as I'd hoped." Cora stepped back, inviting him in. "Please come in. I was just making tea." Kyle entered, his tall frame making the small room seem even smaller. He glanced around, noting the changes she'd made: curtains at the windows, a vase of wildflowers on the table, books arranged on the shelves. "You've made it your own," he observed. "Suits you." "It's becoming home," she agreed, pouring tea into the 2 cups she'd hastily set out. "How was your journey?" They settled at the table, and Kyle told her about his return to the ranch, the favorable reception of his scouting report, and his subsequent assignments. As he spoke, Cora studied him, noting the way sunlight had deepened the lines at the corners of his eyes, how his hands, strong and capable, cradled the delicate teacup. "And what of you?" he asked when he'd finished his account. "Are you finding Benson to your liking?" Cora nodded. "Very much so. The children are eager to learn, for the most part, and their parents have been welcoming. It's different from what I expected when I left Boston, but perhaps better in many ways." "Different how?" She considered the question. "More real somehow. In Boston, teaching was about preparing young ladies for society, deportment, music, enough literature to make conversation but not enough to form controversial opinions." She smiled slightly. "Here, what I teach matters in immediate ways. These children need to understand mathematics to help on their parents' farms and ranches. They need to read well enough to understand contracts and agreements. It feels more purposeful." Kyle nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Purpose is what gives meaning to life. Finding work that matters is a blessing many never know." The simple wisdom of his observation struck Cora anew. This man, with no formal education she knew of, possessed an intelligence and perception that many university-educated men of her acquaintance lacked. "I was hoping," Kyle said after a moment, "that you might accompany me to the social at the church tomorrow evening. It's nothing fancy: music, dancing, food brought by the ladies of the congregation. But it's how Benson marks the end of summer." The invitation, delivered with a hint of uncertainty that belied his usual confidence, charmed Cora completely. "I'd be delighted," she replied. Relief and pleasure transformed his features. "Good, that's good. I'll call for you at 7 if that suits." They parted soon after, both aware of propriety and the fact that Cora lived alone. But the promise of the next evening hung between them like a tangible thing, full of possibility. The social proved to be exactly as Kyle had described: simple but joyful. The townspeople gathered in the church hall for music provided by local talent, tables laden with home-cooked dishes, and an atmosphere of genuine community that Cora found deeply appealing. As the new schoolteacher, she received warm introductions from nearly everyone present. Kyle remained at her side, a steady presence that both grounded and exhilarated her. When the fiddlers struck up a lively tune and couples took to the floor for a country dance, he turned to her with raised eyebrows. "May I have this dance, Miss Anderson?" The formality made her smile. "You may indeed, Mr. Reynolds." Kyle proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer for a man who spent most of his time on horseback. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, guiding her through the unfamiliar steps with confidence. "Where did a cowboy learn to dance so well?" she asked as they circled the floor. A smile tugged at his mouth. "My mother insisted, said no son of hers would grow up to be a clumsy fool at social gatherings. She was a wise woman." "That she was," Kyle agreed, a hint of sadness touching his expression. "She'd have liked you, I think. Strong-minded women understood each other." The thought that he'd considered how his mother might have felt about her suggested a depth of consideration that touched Cora deeply. This wasn't mere courtship. Kyle was imagining her as part of his life in meaningful ways. As the evening progressed, Cora found herself watching the interactions of the townspeople with new eyes. Married couples who clearly still cherished each other after years together. Young families with children who might soon be her students. Elders whose wisdom seemed valued rather than merely tolerated. There was a genuineness to the community that contrasted sharply with the social machinations she'd known in Boston. When the dancing concluded and folks began to depart, Kyle walked her home beneath a sky brilliant with stars. "I enjoyed this evening very much," Cora told him as they reached her door. "Thank you for inviting me." Kyle studied her face in the moonlight. "I'm glad. I've been thinking about this evening since I left last month." The admission, simple but profound, made her breath catch. "Have you?" He nodded, his expression serious. "Cora, I know our acquaintance has been brief and unusual. I know you're just finding your place here, but I want to be clear about my intentions." He took a deep breath. "I admire you greatly. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. I would like to court you properly if you're willing." The formal declaration, so earnestly delivered, might have seemed old-fashioned in Boston. Here, beneath the vast Arizona sky, it felt exactly right. "I am willing," she answered softly. "More than willing." Something like wonder crossed his features before resolving into quiet joy. Slowly, giving her every chance to refuse, Kyle leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet unmistakably passionate, a promise of deeper feelings to come. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Kyle's smile was tender. "I'll call on you tomorrow if I may. Perhaps we could ride out to the river again." "I'd like that," Cora replied, her heart fuller than she could ever remember it being. That night, as she prepared for bed, Cora thought about the strange path that had brought her to this moment. The desperate decision to leave Boston rather than marry a man she didn't love. The terrifying stagecoach attack. The days of wandering, lost and dying of thirst in the merciless desert. And then Kyle, appearing like salvation itself, leading her to water, to safety, to a new life she couldn't have imagined. If any of those elements had been different, if she'd accepted the marriage her father arranged, if she'd taken a different stagecoach, if Kyle hadn't been scouting that particular area on that particular day, they never would have met. The realization was both sobering and exhilarating. Life's path was unpredictable, sometimes frightening, but also capable of delivering unexpected joy just when hope seemed lost. The days that followed took on a rhythm that Cora found deeply satisfying. Mornings and afternoons were devoted to teaching, as the school term began with 24 eager, or at least present, students ranging from shy 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers. Evenings often found Kyle at her door, sometimes with a small gift, wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in Tucson. Once a kitten from a litter born in the stable, but always with that same warm smile that made her heart race. Their courtship progressed with a natural ease that surprised Cora, given their different backgrounds. They discovered shared values despite divergent experiences, a love of learning, a respect for independence, an appreciation for the natural world. Kyle's formal education might have ended early, but his mind was quick and curious. eager for knowledge from books and experience alike. September gave way to October, bringing cooler temperatures and the golden light of autumn to the desert. On a particularly fine Saturday, Kyle suggested a picnic by the river at their spot, as she'd come to think of the island where he'd first taken her. The day was perfect, clear skies, gentle breeze, the cottonwood leaves beginning to turn yellow against the still green riverside vegetation. They spread their blanket in the familiar spot beneath the largest tree, unpacking the meal Cora had prepared: fried chicken, corn bread, apple tarts with cinnamon. "You've become quite the frontier cook," Kyle teased, sampling a tart with evident appreciation. Cora laughed. "Harriet has been teaching me. She says no man will tolerate a wife who can't make a decent pie, no matter how well she teaches arithmetic." As soon as the words left her mouth, Cora felt heat rise to her cheeks. They hadn't spoken of marriage, not directly, though their courtship had made their intentions increasingly clear to themselves and the town. Kyle set down the half-eaten tart, his expression turning serious. "Is that something you've been considering? Marriage?" The directness of the question was characteristic of him, but it still caught Cora off guard. Yes, that is, I've thought about it, about us," he nodded slowly. "So have I. A great deal, in fact." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that he kept concealed in his palm. "I had planned a more eloquent speech, but perhaps plainly speaking is best." His eyes, blue as the sky above them, met hers with unwavering certainty. "I love you, Cora Anderson. I think I began loving you when I found you in the desert, so determined to live despite everything. That love has only grown with each day since." He opened his hand to reveal a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored beyond words if you would wear it as my wife." Tears sprang to Cora's eyes, not of sorrow but overwhelming joy. The man before her, this strong, kind, honorable man who had saved her life in more ways than one, was offering her a future brighter than any she could have imagined when she fled Boston. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Kyle. I love you, and nothing would make me happier than to be your wife." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. Then he gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not promise: passion, and a love as vast as the Arizona sky above them. They were married 4 weeks later in Benson's small church, the entire town turning out for the occasion. Harriet had helped Cora fashion a wedding dress from fine fabric ordered from Tucson, while Kyle appeared in a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving, their vows exchanged with clear voices and unwavering conviction. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from the congregation nearly drowned out the church bells. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing in the church hall. As Kyle led Cora in their first dance as husband and wife, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Happy?" Kyle asked, reading her thoughtful expression. "Beyond words," she assured him. "I was just thinking how strange life's path can be. If not for the stage robbery, if not for getting lost in the desert, if not for needing water," he finished, understanding in his eyes. "But here we are, despite everything, or perhaps because of it." "Here we are," she agreed, leaning into his embrace as they continued to dance. Later that night, in the privacy of the small house Kyle had been building on the edge of town, their wedding gift from the Sonora Land and Cattle Company, in recognition of his years of service, they came together as husband and wife, discovering new depths to their love in the most intimate of ways. Afterward, Lying in his arms with the desert night cool around them, Cora felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it, love?" Kyle asked, concerned. "I'm just thankful," she whispered. "For you, for this life we're beginning, for whatever twist of fate led me into that desert so you could find me." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his arms tightening around her. "I'll always find you," he promised. "And I'll always lead you to water when you're thirsty, to shelter when you need protection, to whatever your heart desires if it's within my power to provide it." "My heart desires only you," Cora told him truthfully. "Everything else is just blessing upon blessing." In the years that followed, those blessings multiplied beyond measure. Cora continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Kyle's mother. A son, James, followed 2 years later, and eventually a second daughter, Marie. Kyle's role with the cattle company expanded to include management responsibilities, allowing him to remain closer to home while still occasionally venturing into the wilderness he loved. Together, they watched Benson grow from a small outpost to a thriving town, proud to be part of its development. On the 10th anniversary of the day Kyle found Cora in the desert, they returned to the river island that had become their special place. Their children played at the water's edge under the watchful eye of Harriet's daughter, who'd become a treasured friend, while Cora and Kyle sat beneath the cottonwood that had witnessed their engagement. "Any regrets?" Kyle asked, his arm around her shoulders, his voice holding the comfortable ease of a man secure in his wife's love. Cora leaned into him, thinking of the life they'd built, the home filled with love and learning, the community that had embraced them both, the children who combined her intelligence with his strength of character. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step of the journey, even the painful ones, led me where I was meant to be, lost in the desert, found by you, led to the river and home to your heart." Kyle's kiss held the same tenderness it had a decade ago, mingled now with the deeper love that comes from years of shared joys and sorrows, challenges faced together, and promises kept. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Cora offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange, beautiful path her life had taken. From the parched desperation of those days alone in the wilderness to the abundant joy of this moment, water had been the constant metaphor, life-giving, cleansing, sustaining. Kyle had led her to the river that first desperate day, but together they had discovered wells of love and strength neither had known they possessed. And in that discovery, they had found not just survival, but a life overflowing with blessings as countless as the stars emerging above the Arizona desert they both now called home.